Okay, hey everybody. Today we have an awesome video lined up for you guys. This one's going to be so good. We have Adam Studd back in the house. He's been on before and he had one of the biggest health transformations I've actually ever seen. And I've interviewed so many people, and this one really blows things out of the park. He lost, I believe, 200 pounds and reversed his diabetes. So he's now a behavior and nutrition researcher, and he knows so much about insulin resistance. So we're going to talk about what causes it today, how it can be reversed. It doesn't have to be a life sentence. Blood sugar problems do not have to be problems that are there to stay. I've seen that through so many people I've interviewed who have reversed those things and just seen amazing things. So let's have a good talk today. Let's hop into it. Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this because you hit it, you hit the nail right on the head. Blood sugar problems don't need to be a lifelong problem. In fact, for the majority of the cases out there, this is a completely solvable issue. And so if you are an individual who is experiencing what we'll call blood glucose fluctuation issues, I want you to know that you are not doomed to that situation for the rest of your life, that whatever it is that's going on for you makes complete sense. And hopefully, by the time this conversation is over, you're going to be able to make a lot more sense of what's going on for you and start taking charge of it.
Yeah, and I think this can be scary for people, right? If they're experiencing
Very.
this, obviously very scary because look at the consequences that can take place from blood sugar problems. And do you think some people out there watching might have blood sugar problems and they have no idea? Like they might not have, maybe sometimes it's not symptomatic for a while.
Yes. Yeah, so the statistics are actually really interesting. There's about about a third of Americans are insulin resistant, meaning that they're either in the pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes state. But there's estimated to be about another 1 to 10 million Americans who are walking around undiagnosed with blood glucose variability conditions. So whether in the pre-diabetes state. So that's not nothing. But what's great is that, like we just said, this is completely, you have complete control over taking charge of your health. This is not something that you are doomed to live with for the rest of your life. So let's make sense of it, right? Because when we talk about insulin resistance, I think it's really important to, number one, if we're going to talk about something, if people are dealing with something that they don't understand,
Hmm.
first, we have to make whatever it is make sense to them so that they can really understand, okay, what is this thing like? Why does it make sense that I have it? Why is it not a failure of my biology that I'm where I am today? Why is it actually exactly what's supposed to be taking place in this environment that's very likely gone wrong, right? And so I know that when people think about insulin resistance, when they hear the word insulin resistance, they immediately think diabetes because it has the word insulin in it.
Hmm.
But what insulin resistance really is, I want people to think of it as a metabolic state. It's a metabolic state that fuels far more than just diabetes. Diabetes is an expression of insulin resistance when it is found in the muscle tissue and in the liver tissue. But insulin resistance also is fueling things like blindness, certain cancers, coronary artery disease, hypertension, atherosclerosis, high cholesterol, fatty liver, PCOS, Alzheimer's disease, neuropathy, kidney failure, retinopathy. These are all metabolic conditions fueled by the body first becoming insulin resistant. So when we talk about insulin resistance, we're not just talking about diabetes. We are actually talking about the health epidemic of the Western world. I think it's great when you and I are going to talk about it, we're going to talk about it through the expression of diabetes because it's a great way to kind of make sense of it. And it's typically the things that people can monitor every day, right? Like you can't monitor your cholesterol with a blood glucose, like with a cholesterol prick. But
True.
people who are struggling with blood glucose issues can monitor their insulin sensitivity on a day-to-day basis because there is technology that allows us to do that. So it's really important and really valuable to discuss it in the context of diabetes.
Hmm.
So let's talk about that, right? Because there's all different types of diabetes, and maybe some people don't know where they fall, right? And
Yeah.
so a non-diabetic would be an individual with an A1C consistently below 5.7%. A person with pre-diabetes would be an individual with an A1C between 5.7 and 6.4%. And a person with type 2 diabetes would be an individual with an A1C above 6.4%. Now, Jillian, do you know why they use percentages? Why it's expressed in percentages?
No, no.
Yeah, so you and I, let's take in a deep breath together right now. Let's just go. So what happened when we did that is oxygen molecules are now flooding our system, and hemoglobin is allowed to attach oxygen to it and carry oxygen throughout the body. So we have oxygen saturation. You can actually measure your oxygen saturation in a percentage. So the reason why A1Cs are expressed in percentages is because that is the percent of every 100 hemoglobin molecules that now has glucose attached to it.
Mm.
As your glucose percentage, your glucose saturation increases and that percentage gets higher, you are now displacing the number of hemoglobin molecules that could have other important nutrients for the health of your organ tissues, right? So you have greater glucose saturation 24 hours a day for a 3-month average. That's what A1C. So again, pre-diabetes is less than 5.7%.
Yeah.
Sorry, healthy is less than 5.7%. Pre-diabetic is 5.7 to 6.4%. And anything above 6.4 is type 2 diabetic.
So I had mine checked and it was 4.9. So that means 4.91. So I can be confident that it's probably pretty okay, right? Then?
4.9% is fantastic.
Okay.
And
Okay.
actually, there's no data demonstrating that if you're consistently below 5.7%, whether you're 5.5% or you're 4.9, if you're consistently below 5.7 while eating a healthy dietary pattern and being active, there's no reason to believe that 4.9 is actually any better for you than
Mm,
5.5,
cool.
5.6.
Okay,
It's
good to
just the
know.
consistency of recognition that I'm less than 5.7%. My blood glucose saturation is within a healthy range on average 24 hours a day for the last 3 months. So
Okay.
you were fantastic. Then there's also things like type 1 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition, an autoimmune condition that is created by the presence of 2 or more diabetic antibodies that attack the beta cells of your pancreas. These are the cells that produce insulin. And as these antibodies destroy the beta cell function, this individual loses the capacity to produce insulin inside of their own body. And
Whoa.
insulin is a life necessary hormone, meaning if you don't have it, you die in 2 weeks, essentially. And so what these individuals now need to do is they need to inject insulin, what's called exogenously or from outside of the body. So they're giving their body what it would have given them if they were still capable. There's also a condition called type 1.5 diabetes, and this is really interesting. Type 1.5 diabetes is an autoimmune condition just like type 1, only there is one single diabetic antibody present. There's actually 5 different types of diabetic antibodies. So people who are type 1 can have 2 or more, anywhere from 2 to 5 of them. But people with 1.5 will have a single diabetic antibody present. And because there's only one, the destruction of those beta cells occurs very slowly. And so you usually don't start to notice the effects of it until you're over the age of 30 or 40 years old. And because it still happens slowly, a lot of the times this is misdiagnosed as pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes because it looks as though a person who's 40 years old, probably isn't eating well, might be slightly overweight, is starting to express the conditions of type 2 diabetes. So a lot of times it goes misdiagnosed for long periods of time. It's actually, the acronym for it is LADA, which stands for latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. So if you're a person who's like, I'm eating really healthy, I'm doing everything, and my blood glucose just keeps going up and up and up and up and up and up and up, and I don't know why. It's very rare, but there's a test that you can do to determine whether it's valuable for you to get your antibodies tested, and we can talk about that later. It's called the C-peptide test,
Hmm.
but it's actually a condition. And then there is actually something called double diabetes. Double diabetes is an individual who has autoimmune diabetes type 1, where their body doesn't produce insulin and they're insulin resistant. So they are both type 1 and type 2 at the same time. All right. So that's a real condition. It absolutely exists. And so let's kind of break through all the misinformation because you and I both
Yeah.
know
There's a
we
lot. Okay, one sec. I just want to ask really quick. With type 1, how does somebody know if they have type 1? I think type
yeah.
2, they can check their A1C and they can check their blood sugars. They know, okay, like this is consistently way out of range. They must have it. But how do people know with type 1?
So type 1 diabetes usually occurs before the age of 20, and it happens really quickly because of the presence of 2 or more antibodies. Usually this person starts to lose weight rapidly. They start to experience very obvious symptoms. And what they will do is, unfortunately, a lot of times it occurs in an emergency where they go into diabetic ketoacidosis or diabetic, they get extremely high blood glucose. They might have what looks like a medical emergency because it is, and they're taken to the hospital and they're given, insulin shot because they'll test their blood glucose in the hospital and it's 4, 5, 600, maybe 700, 800. And then they'll give
Wow.
them insulin. And then what they'll do is they'll give them a test for something called C-peptide. We can talk about it right now. C-peptide test. It's actually one of the most important tests for anybody who thinks or does have a blood glucose variability condition. And unfortunately, most endocrinologists will not recommend this test unless they think you are type 1, but everyone should get this test done.
Mm-hmm.
Your body produces insulin all day long. Your beta cells will produce it when you eat in response to what we would call a bolus of carbohydrate energy. And it also produces it to metabolize background releases of carbohydrate energy. So your liver is constantly producing small amounts of energy, releasing small amounts of glucose into your body to make sure that you have energy for your brain and your muscles during fasting states, small amounts to make sure that you always have energy. It's called hepatic glucose production. And so your pancreas releases small amounts of insulin to help metabolize that energy. The thing is, if you want to know how much insulin you're producing per day, you actually can't measure insulin, fasting insulin, because insulin hormones only live for about 3.5 hours. However, when insulin is produced, it's attached to a C-peptide protein at a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning for every one insulin hormone that's produced, it's attached to one C-peptide protein. That C-peptide protein breaks off and it remains in your blood for about 24 hours, which is fantastic. So if you get a fasting C-peptide test, we can get a very good sense of how much insulin your body produces on a 24-hour basis. And based on where it falls within that range, we can get a sense of whether or not we should be concerned about type 1 diabetes or not. So it's if you want to go get it tested on your own, it's you can order it yourself and it's only about $60. And then you can have someone who's a skilled endocrinologist kind of review it for you. If
Okay.
your endocrinologist won't order it for you, say, you know what, I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to pay for it myself, and then I want you to
Yeah.
review. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's interesting. I didn't know that that was something that typically popped up in people before they were 20. That's good information to know. Like I had
Yeah.
no
So type 1
idea.
diabetes usually occurs pretty early in life. It's very rare to see it after the age of 20. If you are seeing it after the age of 20 in your 30s and 40s, more than likely they're calling it type 1, but it's more than likely type 1.5. It's more than
Mm,
likely just that one. At the end of the day, it's essentially the same condition. It's just whether it's one antibody or two or more. So
yeah.
it's really kind of like a same difference kind of thing.
Okay. And you know what I love about you? That you're actually like, you're not just talking the talk, like you actually reverse problems in these
Yes.
diabetic blood sugar, serious problems in yourself. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the misinformation.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on out there with
There
blood
is
sugar,
so
and people are
much.
so confused, I think.
They're so confused. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there aren't enough of people like you, Jillian, on social media. People who are interested in knowing, not being right. We have
Mm,
a lot of
yeah.
people on social media who want to be the rightest person in the room when it comes to a health condition. And wanting to be right means that you might ignore what contradicts what you believe to be right, right? So
Hmm.
you want this perspective to be right. And so there's a lot of misinformation around diabetes and insulin resistance. And so if I was to go on to social media right now, if I was even to just go into the middle of Austin where I live, like right into downtown and just grab the first person, well, tap them on the shoulder and ask them,
Yeah.
excuse me, what have you ever heard of insulin resistance? More than likely, they would be like, oh, of course, everyone's talking about insulin resistance. I'm like, yeah, they are. That's great. Can you tell me what causes it? Here are the three most common answers you will hear. One, sugar.
Mm.
Two, carbs. Three, insulin. They're going to say that eating too much sugar, eating too much carbs, or forcing your body to produce too much insulin. This is the cause of diabetes. I'm sure of it. Everyone says that. This is not accurate. This is not the cause of insulin resistance. And I want to explain to you, or I want to give you a perfect definition of what insulin resistance actually is. And then we'll explain how that takes place. And then you'll see that sugar, carbs, and insulin are a part of your metabolism, but are not the big causal factor in insulin resistance. So when we talk about insulin resistance, this is the best definition I can possibly give for what insulin resistance is. Insulin resistance is the result of an excess accumulation of fatty acids. inside of tissues that are not designed to store large quantities of fatty acids. The two keywords here are excess and large. Okay. At its core, insulin resistance is an excess energy problem. And the result of that problem is the dysfunction of muscle and liver cells. Right. So how does this happen? Right? How does that excess accumulation of fatty acids inside of tissues that aren't designed to store large quantities of fatty acids, how does that happen? And then what happens when you do that to your body? Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
first let's talk about what insulin sensitive metabolism looks like. Right? So a person who's very insulin sensitive, you, me, friends of ours who we know live a healthy lifestyle and exercise, what happens when we eat a meal and why is that insulin sensitive? Person like you, 4.9% A1C, phenomenal. You are a healthy person, you're active, you eat a healthy diet. When you eat a carbohydrate rich meal, here is what happens. That carbohydrate enters your body. In the digestive system, it is broken down into monosaccharide sugars and absorbed into the blood as glucose. As the glucose enters your blood, there is a rise in your blood glucose levels. So from before you ate that meal, your blood glucose in a fasting state is likely at around 85, given your A1C percentage,
Mm-hmm.
right? When that glucose enters your blood, within 1 to 2 hours, your blood glucose level will rise no more than 40 points, right? It can go up to 140. Anywhere from up to 140 and less is a completely healthy number for it to reach. At this time, your beta cells have sensed this rise in blood glucose and have released insulin to grab a hold of those carbohydrate molecules, the glucose molecules, and start to transport them to tissue all over the body. Insulin hormone grabs a glucose molecule, starts to drive it through your bloodstream over to your muscle cells. Your muscle cells have these insulin receptors that sit on the outside of them. That glucose molecule, that insulin hormone knocks on the insulin receptor door and says, "Hey, insulin receptor, I have glucose here. Do you want to take it up? Do you want to use it as energy?" The insulin receptor says, "Yes, this is my preferred source of energy. I would love to take it up." It opens the door to the cell. The insulin delivers the glucose. The cell takes it in and does one of two things. It either immediately uses it as energy or stores it for later use in what's called a glucose granule, a glycogen granule, which is where your body stores carbohydrate energy. As that happens at about 1 to 2 hours, your blood glucose starts to come down and will be under 100 within 3 hours. So a healthy
Mm-hmm.
postprandial curve starts below 100, will go no higher than 140 by 2 hours, and will be back down under 100 within 3 hours. No matter what, if your blood glucose curve falls under that curve, you are a healthy insulin sensitive individual for a high carbohydrate meal. All right. So
Mm-hmm.
what happens? How do people go from that to being insulin resistant? Well, as I mentioned, your body stores energy, but it only stores two kinds of energy. It stores carbohydrate energy in the form of glycogen, and it stores fat energy in the form of triglycerides inside of the cell and something called a lipid droplet. Now, we both know that in Western cultures, our diets are pretty rich in fat, saturated fat,
Mm-hmm.
and calories. Okay. So when someone in Western culture starts to eat the Western diet, they consume a meal that is high in fat, saturated fat, and excess calories. Here's what happens. These calories get consumed, and as soon as this saturated fat enters the digestive system, there is an interesting particle that is created, and it is called a chylomicron. And a chylomicron particle it's essentially a fat transport particle. The reason that we have this is because fat is actually very rare in nature. And so actually most foods in nature are low fat. Even animal meat in nature is about 13 to 15%. It's very low fat. And fat is your body's savings account. It's there to be stored inside of your cells and small amounts in your adipose tissue to be used in the event that you're in an environment where there is no energy at all. So it's good for your muscle cells, your liver cells, your kidney cells to have small stores of saturated or of fat, and
Mm-hmm.
for you to have small amounts of adipose tissue to keep you alive in the event. But carbohydrate energy is your body's checking account. It's the energy that when it comes in, it wants to use it immediately. But if fat is rare in nature, and if it's the energy that's going to save your life when necessary, we have to have a mechanism that allows us to ensure that if we consume fat, we can store it really, really well. And that's what chylomicron particles do. They get created in the digestive system, they enter the bloodstream, and they grab a hold of these triglycerides. Triglycerides are what the form of fat in food.
Hmm.
They grab these triglycerides and they start driving them to tissue all over the body before carbohydrate energy. The interesting thing about chylomicrons is that unlike insulin, which has to communicate with the insulin receptor in order to deliver energy into the cell, chylomicrons do not require communication. They can deliver this fat energy into your cell uncontrolled and unregulated. So they're delivering these triglycerides in free fatty acid form into your muscle cells, into your liver cells, into your kidney cells, into your vasculature, into your brain cells, uncontrolled, unregulated over and over and over again. And inside the cell, your lipid droplet that stores the fat energy grows larger and larger and larger and larger and larger, uncontrolled, until at a certain point, there's now just too much energy inside of the cell. There's too much energy, and actually taking on additional energy is dangerous, can damage the cell, and create an event called energy poisoning for the cell. It actually can create cell death. So,
Wow.
so your body's going to do something really important. Your body's going to protect you. How is it going to protect you? Believe it or not, this is where the IRS saves your life. So inside of your cells, you have these molecules called insulin receptor substrate molecules, IRS molecules. And their job is to be your cell's accountants. They're going to account for how much energy is in the cell. What kind of energy is it? Is it being used effectively? And is there a problem? And they identify a problem. Oh my gosh, this lipid droplet is massive. Fat energy lasts a long time. It takes an incredible amount of time to shrink a lipid droplet. We
Hmm.
need to save this cell. So they walk up to the insulin receptors that sit on the outside of the cell and say, hey, listen, insulin receptors, come here for a second. I need to show you something. Do you see what's going on in here? Do you see the size of this lipid droplet? Do you see the problem that we have? I need to ask you to do something that I've never asked you to do before, but here's what we have to do. If insulin comes around here wanting to deliver any energy, I need you to say two things to them. I need you to say, close for business, go somewhere else. Does that make sense to you? And the insulin receptors are like, you know, you've never asked us to do this before, but you're in charge. And I can see how if we do let energy in, we could damage the cells. We could be causing harm to our bodies. So you're right. Let's shut the doors for now. I bet you this problem is going to solve itself. We must be in the wrong environment for a short period of time. Remember, your body does not know that it lives in the modern environment. It has
True.
no idea that you're going to continue this pattern.
Hmm.
Now, the insulin receptors have been instructed to reject the action of insulin. Those cells have just become insulin resistant. And what happens is, as this person now consumes anything rich in carbohydrate energy, just like what you and I do on a regular basis, when that carbohydrate enters the bloodstream as glucose, that glucose level rises. The beta cell senses the rise, releases insulin. Insulin grabs those molecules, walks up to the cell like it's supposed to, knocks on the cell door like it's supposed to, and says, I have glucose. Do you want to take it up? Just like it's supposed to. Insulin receptors, for the first time ever, say, close for business, go somewhere else. And now the insulin hormone actually says, you know what? No problem. No problem, muscle cells. I got a lot of tissue in the body. I'm going to go take it somewhere else. But you and I both know that a metabolic state is not a site specific problem. It's a whole problem. You
Hmm.
are not just insulin resistant in your muscles. You're not just insulin resistant in your liver. This is the place. So as this insulin hormone is trying to deliver this glucose to tissues, it keeps getting the same message, close for business, go somewhere else. And eventually that insulin hormone dies in about 3.5 hours and the glucose is left in the blood. And
Hmm.
it rises and rises and rises over the course of time until this person experiences symptoms like urinating a lot, brain fog, going to getting thirsty all the time. They go to their doctor. The doctor checks their blood glucose. Oh my gosh, you're pre-diabetic or you're type 2 diabetic. This is where it gets a little confusing for people
Hmm.
because what's likely going to happen is the doctor is going to be a very conventional doctor, unless you're lucky. You have a very, very smart doctor who understands the nutritional biochemistry of insulin resistance. Maybe they're already plant-based or plant predominant. And the doctor's going to go, I have a solution for you. And I can prove to you that my solution works. We're going to put you on a low carb diet. We're going to have you play what we call the carbohydrate avoidance game. You why that's the solution. Eat this banana right now. And we're going to measure your blood glucose. We're going to put on a blood glucose monitor and we're going to measure your blood glucose. Eat
Hmm.
this banana. Person eats the banana and their blood glucose goes 200, 250.
Hmm.
They wait until it comes back down. And the doctor says, okay, now eat this piece of butter, eat this piece of chicken, eat this piece of steak right now. They do it. And what happens? The blood glucose doesn't move. And then the doctor goes, there you go. I've just shown you carbohydrate is the problem. So now your solution is to avoid carbohydrate as much as possible. Well, what happens when you reduce the number of calories from carbohydrate energy and you need to add those calories back from somewhere? Where do you think it's going to come from? More than likely, they're going to suggest something like a ketogenic diet. It means replacing it with fat and saturated fat.
Yeah, I see even on YouTube, a lot of the doctors are like keto is the way to reverse
Exactly.
this. You have to do keto. But doesn't that, even though then their sugars are staying stable, isn't that like clogging the cells over the long term even more?
You
Yeah.
are absolutely right. And this is why it's so confusing because what actually happens when people do that? At first, it looks like it works.
Hmm.
Not seeing blood glucose spikes anymore. Their fasting blood glucose might come down. Their A1C might come down. Everything looks like it works. So they'll say to themselves, I figured it out. How could this be wrong? How is this not being insulin sensitive? Well, you just said it. By avoiding carbohydrate, they have removed the body's opportunity to send you the signal that something is wrong. The high blood glucose level is the signal of insulin resistance. It isn't insulin resistance. So as you've added more dietary fat to your diet, those lipid droplets are as saturated or even more saturated than before. You won't know it until you eat a carbohydrate meal or something rich in carbohydrates. But what happens is as they've already convinced themselves that carbohydrates are the problem, if they do go and eat a banana and they see that blood glucose skyrocket, they don't say to themselves, oh, I'm still insulin resistant. They say, that's evidence again. Carbohydrates are the problem. This is exactly what I've been thinking, what all of social media has told me that carbohydrates are
Hmm.
the problem. I've just seen it time and time again. But what is actually happening is that they're manipulating the amount of carbohydrates in response to a singular mechanism. That mechanism is their post-meal blood glucose response. In response to a singular mechanism, they have manipulated the amount of carbohydrates. They've avoided it in order to simply have lower blood glucose levels. That is not solving the problem.
Hmm.
If you are not able to show that your body can metabolize carbohydrate energy effectively, if you cannot eat a high carbohydrate food and have your body demonstrate that it can metabolize that carbohydrate energy as appropriate, regardless of your A1C, regardless of your fasting blood glucose, you are insulin resistant. Period. End of story.
Wow.
That, and so people would say, well, I don't care. My A1C is low. My fasting blood glucose is low. Why should I care if that means that I'm insulin resistant? Because as I said when we talked about that, when we started the conversation, insulin resistance isn't just diabetes. It's also liver disease. It's also atherosclerosis. It's also coronary artery disease. It's also certain cancers. It's also retinopathy. It's also kidney disease. It's also Alzheimer's. It's also all these other metabolic conditions that are going on in the background that you can't see yet. So then the question is, Adam, that's great. You've told us that excess saturated fat and excess calories create a metabolic state where there's too much energy in the cells, and now the cells cannot metabolize carbohydrate energy. Great. How do I solve that problem? We know what to do. We know what not to do. What do we do?
Do you think people can solve it quicker by going on a cleanse? Like, because it sounds like the cells need a cleanse, right? They don't
Yes,
have to go on a cleanse though, right? But can they or no?
they can. It depends on, that's a person to person, like context-based solution. Like it depends. If someone is extremely symptomatic and as a result of that, they're on high doses of medication, a
Mm-hmm.
slower approach is safer
Mm-hmm.
because that medication can become too effective too quickly. And then you can get into a situation where you're having very dangerous low blood sugars and you could have a fall risk, right? So there's reasons to do a cleanse, like go all in at once, and there are very real reasons to do it slower, have a
Mm-hmm.
slower approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of going to be based on you, both your own personality type. Some people really like rules, where I either do this or I don't do this. Some people like to do the slow approach, and then if you're in a situation where it's a risk to you to determine which direction you go, really look at the risks and say which is the safest way for me to go. But at the end
Okay.
of the day, getting to that point where you've created the proper environment for insulin sensitivity,
Mm-hmm.
they're either way. It's just which way is
Yeah.
best. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we want to know how to solve this problem, we have to first start asking much better questions. Most people who are diagnosed with diabetes are trying to solve a very specific question. How do I lower my blood glucose? And that seems like a very, very valuable question to ask, right? But you and I both know that there are lots of ways to lower your blood glucose that aren't valuable for your long-term health. I mean, you could just eat bacon all day. Your blood glucose would be low because you're not eating carbohydrate, but that is a terrible decision.
Yeah, because look
That-
at the other damage you're doing to your body, you know? So you want to find
You're
something where
actually
you're lowering it, but you're nourishing and you're healthy and it's not hurting yourself in other ways, right?
right. And again, just avoiding carbohydrate isn't the same thing as lowering insulin resistance. By increasing fat and saturated fat, you're actually increasing your insulin resistance, even though you're not seeing it because you're not consuming carbohydrate energy. So we know that there's lots of ways that you could do that to see a lower number on your blood glucose monitor, but that isn't representing insulin sensitivity. So what's a better question to ask? A better question to ask is, why does my body no longer tolerate carbohydrate energy? Why? All of a sudden, for 20, 30 years, I was eating bananas and sweet potatoes and rice and beans whenever I wanted. I never had a problem. Now I woke up one day and I can't do any of those things without it causing symptoms in me. What is going on? Why can I not do that? How do I solve that problem? Well, we just talked about the influence of fat. Saturated fat seems to be far more insulting to insulin resistance than fats from nuts and seeds. Fat and excess calories seem to be the biggest driver of insulin resistance, period, end of story. So if we're aware of that, we need to reorganize our calories to look far more representative of a dietary pattern that will increase insulin sensitivity. So what does that look like? Well, it actually looks like a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet.
Low
It looks
fat being the key, right? Yeah.
low fat being the key, especially for people who are very insulin resistant.
Yeah, because even if they're
If you're
getting
someone
carried
like
away,
you or
whole.
me, we can tolerate, a higher fat meal here or there, right? But if you're someone who's like, hey, my A1C is 9%, like mine when I was diagnosed was 12%, right? So
Whoa.
that meant my fasting blood sugar was 400. Fasting, not fed blood sugar. All right.
That's
So
crazy. Yeah. So someone in that kind of serious
I need to
situation
take care of
shouldn't
this
go whole
problem.
foods, plant-based and be eating avocados and nuts all day long because that would
That's
still
right.
halt their healing probably, right?
That's right. So let's talk about what happens when you adopt a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet. You're doing two things. One, you're reducing fat and saturated fat. Number two, the calorie density of a whole food plant-based diet is far lower than the calorie density of a Western diet. So just by the nature of switching the choices of foods you're eating, not even the amount of food that you're eating, you're going to eat less calories. And number three, you're increasing fiber intake. This is a great thing to do. Fiber slows the absorption of energy from your stomach, which means that you're going to have better control over your blood glucose curves while you're still insulin resistant if your meals contain more fiber than if they don't.
Hmm.
So when you consume this carbohydrate rich, low fat dietary pattern, the majority of calories are coming from carbohydrate energy. They enter the bloodstream. Now remember, the cells of your body, your muscle cells, your liver cells, those insulin receptors are still shut off. They've still been instructed to not take up energy. But most of the energy coming in is carbohydrate energy. So there's no chylomicrons delivering more energy into those cells. So what are the cells going to use for energy now? If they can't get it from your food, they're going to start to shrink that lipid droplet, and they're going to start shrinking that thing quickly. They start burning off those lipid droplets one after another, and that thing shrinks until eventually the IRS saves your life again. Those
That's
insulin,
incredible that that can happen, though, that it can,
oh
when you
yeah,
do the
like
wrong
within
thing, you
within
can
a
create these
matter of
problems. But if you
a,
do the right thing, you can change the problem, right?
that's exactly right. The insulin receptors notice that they are running out of energy. There is no spending opportunity now. There is no currency to purchase life inside of those cells. And so they run up to the insulin receptor and say, "Hey, remember what I told you about not responding to the insulin hormone, not letting them deliver energy? Forget all that. We're running out of cash in here. We need that carbohydrate energy now." Those insulin receptors come back online. The insulin delivers glucose. The glucose goes into the cell. It gets stored in the glycogen granule or burned immediately as energy. As soon as you're done eating, you go for a walk. Walking elicits a energy burn. What do you think happens? That glycogen granule shrinks. Next meal comes in, it grows back, it shrinks. The energy is coming in and going out just as it's supposed to. You are now an insulin sensitive individual by doing two specific things: replacing saturated fat with carbohydrate rich whole plant foods and reducing your total calorie intake. You have solved the problem because the problem wasn't your biology. Your biology was responding exactly the way it was supposed to respond to a dietary pattern that does not meet your needs. When you change that dietary pattern back to one that is far more representative of what our biology responds to well, your cells responded exactly as they're supposed to, and they restored insulin sensitivity. There's nothing wrong with you if you are finding yourself in this situation. It is not a failure of you. It is not a failure of your desire to be healthy. It is certainly not a failure of your willpower. It is an environment, a caloric environment that is designed unintentionally by you. You found yourself there, but that environment has been designed to create insulin resistance. Period. End of story. That's what's happening. The solution looks exactly like the dietary patterns that you, Jillian, promote on your channel. And it is no shock that that is why you are so insulin sensitive. All right.
And but for those of us who are whole foods, plant-based, or eating like really healthy diet, do you think even, I know we can eat, you said like not be afraid of like the fats as much, but do you think we still need to be mindful of not going crazy? Like, huge cashew dressings every day and then three avocados. And then like, do you think maybe still problems could start up if we, get like that?
So I like to think of it in terms of measurement, right? So when I think of a dietary pattern that is likely most people are going to do really well with, I would keep my dietary fat to less than 25% of my calories per day,
Hmm.
right? Above 10, less than 25%. And the reason why I say above 10 is that if you're eating less than 10%, you have to eat a huge volume of food in order to get enough calories to sustain your needs.
Yeah.
So between 10 and 25% of calories per day, the rest coming from carbohydrate and plant protein sources. Like if you're doing
Yeah.
that, you're doing really well. If you're finding yourself in a very insulin resistant state like I was, a good strategy was to, instead of having 25% be your cap, make it 15. That creates an opportunity to really encourage that insulin sensitivity return,
Hmm.
and you're likely going to do really well
And pretty quick, right?
really quickly. I mean, I reversed I was medication free in about 6 weeks of being diagnosed. And now I couldn't get my diagnosis reversed until 3 months because an A1C is a
Mm.
measurement that measures 3 months of time.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get it measured until 3 months. I got my second A1C done at 5 months. I went from a 12 to a 5.3% in 5 months.
That's
Now, there isn't
insane.
a medication on earth that can do that. Not
Yeah.
one medication on earth that can do that.
And you actually fix the problem, right? Versus what
Actually,
a lot of those other things do. So remind us again, like what exactly did you eat? Did you make any mistakes? Would you do it differently again? What do you think people, because a lot of this is food. What do you think we
yes.
should be eating?
So at first, I made the mistake of being concerned about my meal to meal choices. I was so worried at first was, is it okay for me to have fruit in the morning? Is it okay for me to have a banana at night? Like, should I be eating more grains? Should I be eating more starches? Like, I was afraid on a meal to meal basis. And I was doing that because I was making the mistake of measuring my blood glucose from meal to meal, right?
Mm.
Looking at that short-term mechanism and then making an assumption as to whether that food was a good choice based on what it did in the moment. Problem is, if you are insulin resistant, you can't look at what you eat when you're insulin resistant and determine whether that's a good choice for insulin sensitivity. You kind of have to go back in time, like in a time machine, and look at what were the choices that you made over the last 5 years that got you to an insulin resistant state. Are the
Mm.
choices you're making now, do they look like those choices? If they do, it's probably not a good idea. If they don't, it might be a good idea. I was a little too involved in the short-term stuff, but I kept it very simple. I told myself that my job wasn't to try every plant-based recipe I could. My job was to make it so simple to eat plants every day that I could do it long enough so my body could demonstrate what it was capable of doing. Right. So I ate oatmeal every morning, just plain oats with cinnamon and a little sea salt on top, fruit on the side. For lunch, it was a rice and bean bowl with microwave steamed veggies, right? I mean, I kept it so simple. And then for dinner, it was lentils and potato bowl with veggies and oil-free sauce, like a low-fat sauce for both of those. And I just ate those meals every day for 10 straight months. I made it so, I made it so difficult for me not to be able to do the healing thing that I just was able to do it, whether it felt difficult or not, right? I was able to say, yeah, I'm really feeling tempted or I'm frustrated today. But you know what? Eating that meal takes me 5 minutes to make. There is no excuse for me not to do that first. No matter if I want to do the wrong thing later, first, I always act in alignment with my health, my priorities, and my values. And by doing that, it was always after I had proven to myself that I'm worthy of that choice, that those temptations went away immediately after. Those cravings went away because I was so proud of myself.
Yeah.
Empowering thing to know that even though I was tempted, I did the healing thing anyways. And that always encouraged me to just go another day. And so, I mean, you don't have to do it like I did. There's lots of ways to organize your calories that look exactly like a whole food plant-based diet. I just found that that was easiest for me.
And do you think people have to be careful having too much fruit? Because I noticed your meals didn't sound like they're super high fruit. Do you think people say they want to just eat fruit all day or a lot of fruit? Like, do you
Yeah.
think they have
So
to be mindful of that?
the only reason you would have to be mindful of fruit is if you are, like, let's say, making a lot of fruit smoothies
Hmm.
where you have a high amount of insulin resistance. Like, let's say you have an A1C like mine was, and you're just getting started. When you blend the fruit, sometimes it can impact your body's ability to slow that absorption. The fiber integrity gets destroyed a little bit. And
Hmm.
so if you were to eat the whole fruit instead, your blood glucose rise might be lower than if you had blended it.
Yeah.
And prevent symptoms only. That's a good idea. But whether they're blended or not, at the end of the day, it's still going to move you towards insulin sensitivity. So again,
True.
that's a point, that's a person to person decision. If you're mildly insulin resistant and you want to have smoothies, go for it. If you're a person like me who has an A1C of 12 and they wake up symptomatic, and having it go up another 100 points is actually very dangerous for me, maybe
Hmm.
consider whole fruit instead.
Yeah, and I know you're saying the fiber is really important for slowing things down. So that's like probably like really key, especially for somebody trying to heal, maybe for all of us, but for somebody who's trying to reverse blood sugar problems. So maybe they should not juice at all then, even green juice, right? If there's no fiber and it's just speedy fast in there, or what do you think?
Well, remember, green juices are mostly juices from things like kale and collards
Mhm.
and your dark leafy greens, which are far more nutrient dense than in things other than carbohydrates. Like, they're not very carbohydrate rich. There's not a lot
Mhm.
of like active sugars in there. And again, you really shouldn't be worried about juicing. Even juicing is a low fat
True.
carbohydrate rich solution.
Yeah, because
And so
that's the key, right? Staying low fat. That's the key.
exactly. And
Yeah.
again, juicing is another way to, at the end of the day, consume a lower calorie diet, right? You're not going to juice yourself into 5,000 calories. Not if it's
Yeah.
whole natural juice. And again, most of it being those dark leafy greens where it's just so much nutrients flooding your body. I'm a fan of fiber. I think fiber should be a part of everybody's dietary pattern. I think we should be shooting for fiber-rich diets. And so
Mhm.
juicing can be a great way to, get yourself through a craving, do a green juice in between lunch and dinner or breakfast and lunch. That's a great idea. But I would build your calories around fiber-rich meals.
Okay. And do you think there's special foods in particular or just like whole foods in general?
Yeah, I think again, it's important to look at the quality of the entire dietary pattern rather than the individual foods and whether some foods are better for insulin sensitivity or not.
Hmm.
As long as they are whole, intact plant foods, as long as they are carbohydrate or protein-rich plant foods that are low in fat, these are the best foods for you to eat. Because remember, insulin sensitivity cannot be measured simply by how low an individual gets their fasting blood glucose and A1C. Insulin sensitivity is the ability to maintain consistent healthy fasting blood glucose levels and consistent healthy A1C values while consuming carbohydrate-rich dietary patterns. So the solution comes first by building the carbohydrate-rich dietary pattern that's low in fat, high in fiber, that gets you to an insulin sensitive state. It's
Yeah.
not what you want after you've lowered your blood glucose levels, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think any fasting should take place or any intermittent fasting or it's okay?
I'm a fan of fasting for the purpose of it being, again, for those people that really like rules, right?
Mm.
In intermittent fasting, there's some interesting studies that demonstrate changes in the gut microbiome for fasting, and there's very real effects of glucose metabolism as a result of a healthy gut microbiome. Like a healthy gut microbiome is far better at metabolizing fat and carbohydrate energy than one that's impaired. And so, if this is a strategy that you can employ that allows you to get into a proper energy balance, right? If you're overweight and you're trying to remove body mass,
Hmm.
getting a lower energy balance or a lower calorie diet is going to be effective. And that's a great way to do it for some people. Because again, remember, the thing that I'm not a fan about in intermittent fasting is that intermittent fasting doesn't instruct you to change what you eat, just when you eat.
Hmm.
So intermittent fasting can be a strategy employed after you've changed your dietary pattern, making sure
Okay.
that the quality of your calories are really accounted for first. And then if you're like, hey, I want to try this other strategy, some people have found it to be really effective at helping them reset their schedules around when they eat, reintroducing them to the experience of hunger, getting a sense of what hungry actually feels like, understanding how to get around boredom with choices other than food. I love that strategy.
Hmm.
Um, but other than that, I mean, again, the dietary pattern itself is the key factor first. And then
Hmm.
all these other things are like little turbochargers that just make the engine go a little bit faster, right?
Yeah. And I think a big turbocharger is the exercise, right? Like I know when I was monitoring my blood sugar, I would notice whenever if I would go for a walk or get some exercise, it brings it right down. So I think that is super, super important, right? To get moving too.
You do not overestimate the impact of how much movement matters. Okay. Let me explain to you why you saw what you saw whenever you are looking at your blood glucose monitor and you go for a walk or you go exercise. Why does your blood glucose come down? So interestingly, your body has all these mechanisms to make sure that it can protect you, to give you things you need if it thinks you need it. So remember, we're the only species of animal that actually decides to do intentional exercise. There's
Hmm.
no animal on Earth that's like, I really need to get in extra steps today. Okay, we're the
True.
only species of animal that's doing this, right? So when we do that, we release a signal to our survival instincts that says, oh, this person is now needing energy to either fight or run from something. There is something stressful happening. We need to give this body energy. Now, because you haven't consumed energy, your body now needs to use stored energy or any residual energy in your body, right? And
Hmm.
so normally, insulin is the mechanism by which energy gets from your blood into your cells, into your muscle cells. But when you elevate your heart rate, when you give your body a signal that says, hey, there's something going on, it's important, we're elevating our heart rate, we are either fighting from something, we're running for something, we're doing something important for our survival. You have a mechanism called a GLUT4 transporter. A GLUT4 transporter is activated when your heart rate elevates. And what this transporter does is it allows you to metabolize energy independent of insulin. So this is like, hey, they need energy. We do not want to have to wait for insulin to be produced, to be released, and for the time of action to occur for insulin to start working. We need energy now. So
Hmm.
this glucose transporter activates and you start to metabolize energy independent of insulin. So actually, one of the best things people can do to increase their post-meal insulin sensitivity, not just their 24-hour insulin sensitivity, but their post-meal insulin sensitivity is after you finish eating, go for a 15-minute brisk walk. And what do I mean by brisk walk? I mean like walk at a pace where if you were having a conversation with somebody, it would sound like this. Hey, yeah,
Hmm.
it's a great walk. I'm really having a good time. Like you want to kind of sound like Mark Wahlberg, like, hey guys,
Hmm.
yeah, it's great.
I love it. Yeah.
This is going to help actually metabolize that glucose that you just consumed through two mechanisms: the insulin that your pancreas is producing and the glucose transporters that your body is ready to use. That's one thing. The other amazing adaptation that your body can do is as you add lean muscle to your body, and I'm not talking about like significant amounts of mass, just small amounts of lean muscle to your body, the muscle tissue now has more mass to support, even just a little bit. In order to support it, it needs more energy. So, how does it facilitate more energy uptake?
Hmm.
Well, the cells of your muscles have this incredible ability to build additional insulin receptor sites as you add more lean muscle. Those additional insulin receptor sites now allow you to take in more energy per second. That's part one of the solution. Well, there's more energy coming in per second. How do we burn it faster? There's this really amazing adaptation that occurs inside the cell, and it's called mitochondrial biogenesis.
Hmm.
Mitochondrial biogenesis is the actual creation of new mitochondria inside of the cell. The mitochondria are the energy burning factories of your cell. They are the sites that actually burn the energy, that convert it into ATP that allow you to use energy to move and do life and function. And so by adding lean muscle to your body now has the ability to take in and burn more energy 24 hours a day, which means you are now more insulin sensitive 24 hours a day permanently. So movement matters to a degree that cannot be overstated. We are organisms, we are a species of animal that was designed to move. We should be moving far more than we are, and it's an important part of insulin sensitivity.
Yeah. And do you think that there's other forms of exercise that are that are superior and really good for blood sugar management, or do you think walking is the king, or like what is the best?
I think walking is something that if you have the ability to do it, everybody should be doing it just as a basic part of being alive. The other thing that we should be doing is we should be doing some form of resistance training if we're
Okay, yeah.
capable of doing it.
Hmm.
We are throughout our entire evolutionary story as a species, we have been a species that has pushed and pulled and carried things.
Hmm.
And pushing and pulling and carrying weight is a signal. It sends a signal through your entire body that asks you to defend itself against
Hmm.
that challenge. And it defends itself by using energy to do two things. One, add muscle, and two, add bone density. So your bones are living structures just like your muscles, and they respond to that stimulus, that weight,
Hmm.
and respond by taking in calcium and building more strong, dense bones. Muscles respond to a challenge by taking that energy and defending themselves and making themselves stronger so they can defend themselves against that challenge. The more muscle you have, the more insulin sensitive you are. Again, I'm not saying you need to be bench pressing 250 pounds, but we should be applying resistance to our body. Our survival, our longevity is encouraged
Hmm.
by challenging our skeletal and muscular frame. And we
Hmm.
see it increase insulin sensitivity. We see it increase functional longevity. The number one reason people end up in a care home isn't because they're sick. The number one reason why people end up in a care home is because they can't get out of a chair on their own. If you can't do that and you fall, you can't get up. And if you live alone and you can't get up, that's a risk of death. That's the number one reason people end up in care assisted living. It isn't because they're sick, it's because they can't get out of a chair. That's a result of muscle and bone atrophy. That is a result of not letting your body do what it is designed by nature to do, which is to get better by being challenged. That's what our bodies are designed to do.
I love that. Okay, well said. And okay, I interviewed Dr. Morse recently. So I
Mhm.
was just watching the video back to get it ready for my editor this morning. And he was talking a lot about how blood sugar problems are, that means we have compromised adrenals, that our adrenals are messed up too. Do you think that's true or no?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the relationship between adrenal issues
Hmm.
and blood glucose issues. It wouldn't be surprising to me because individuals who have, type 2 diabetes or any significant insulin resistant issues like fatty liver or chronic kidney disease are doing a lot of things that also impair other parts of your health. It's not, like I said, it isn't a site specific problem,
Yeah.
right? So more than likely, there's a lot of other things going on. Adrenal fatigue, adrenal issues could be one of them.
Okay.
And again, the solution is rooted. It always finds itself back to the singular kind of decision. Does the environment that we live in look like the disease that we have, or
Hmm.
does the environment that we live in look like the health that we want?
Hmm.
Right? So if I was to go upstairs and look at my kitchen and bring in somebody who was an expert in insulin sensitivity and say, look at my kitchen, do you think the person who lives here is insulin resistant? They would pretty quickly go, there's no way. If this is how they eat, this is an insulin sensitive, healthy person. And
Hmm.
if I was to show you what my house looked like when I was sick, this person would look in, they'd see a bunch of processed foods, they'd see a lot of animal products, they'd see, a lot of wrappers and sodas, and they go, this does not end well for this person. And it's obvious. So it first starts by taking a look at the environment that you're in, because your willpower and your determination are a limiting source. It's a finite resource, right? It's much better to, instead of trying to outcompete the environment that you live in, make your environment look like the life you want. Your willpower will be far less necessary if your environment doesn't require you to depend on it. Okay. So a person who has healthy adrenal function will have an environment that looks very similar to an insulin sensitive person. It'll
True.
look very similar to yours. It'll look very similar to mine. Ours is going to be slightly different because of our preferences for
Hmm.
foods, but the pattern is going to be the same.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it went during your process, I think you said it took about 10 months to reverse the problems, right? Or no, you said about 6 weeks, or
It
how
was,
you
it
ate the
was
same thing for 10 months, but
Yeah, 5 months and my diabetes was gone. My high cholesterol, I had a cholesterol of over 300. That was within the healthy range. My blood pressure was 210 over 115. That was within the healthy range. I had erectile dysfunction that was reversed within 5 months. And I have not had a single lab work since that has had any blood lipid level or hormone level or metabolic level ever out of the healthy range. My
wow.
A1C has been consistently below 5.3. My cholesterol has been consistently below 150, right? My testosterone levels are incredibly healthy. I exercise every single day. I've been medication free for 13 years. And it's all because the environment isn't the environment of a person who would never need medication.
Yeah, and when you were eating those things, when you were in the process of reversing it, did you have a cheat day here and there too, or no? And what do you think about somebody who's like, okay, I'm gonna do this whole foods plant-based, I'm gonna do this, but once a week, every Saturday, I need to have this high fat thing, or that do you think that that's acceptable, or it's really not?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the idea of saying that there's a right and a wrong, right?
Hmm.
There's valuable and then there's what's not valuable. And that really comes down to a person to person basis. I'm also not an abolitionist when it comes to like dietary stuff. The way I think of it is this. If we want to move in the direction of health, we don't have to get 100% on every test to get an A in that class, but we do need to do really well. We need to get 90% or greater every single day. 90% of the calories you consume need to look like the life you want.
Hmm.
10% can look like whatever else you want it to do, but 90% needs to be in alignment with your values and your priorities for caring for yourself. So if for you, 6 days a week, you eat fully aligned with a whole food plant-based diet, and then on day 7 for one meal, it looks like something else, and that keeps you in that 90% or greater range, and it's moving you forward, bravo to you. That's
Hmm.
still an extraordinary effort. You've done very, very well. If you're a person who needs a rule of saying, I need to choose healthy every
Hmm.
time because the other direction is so attractive to me, I know what's going to happen,
Hmm.
then know yourself and make the decision that's right for you, right?
Good advice too, because yeah, a lot of people can't just do the one day. The one day turns into the next day, next day. Next thing you know, you're off track and bad things are
Exactly.
about to take place. So I get
Exactly.
it. And
Yeah.
so you study behavior and you're a nutrition and behavior researcher, right? So I'm not sure if you study this exactly, but do you notice a correlation between the the nutrition or lack of nutrition that people eat, the way people eat and their behavior?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great question because actually I ran the very first study to investigate the effects of nutrition on addiction recovery outcomes in treatment facilities. And so we were looking specifically at the outcomes of self-esteem and resilience. So resilience being the ability to be confronted with a difficult moment and then draw upon tools to move you in the direction that you'd like to go rather than in the direction you don't want to go. And we used a scale called the Connor-Davidson Resilience Scale, which is a scale used to measure the effectiveness of PTSD treatments. So we're looking at people who are have significant issues where resilience is a factor that they have to call upon
Hmm.
multiple times a day if you have significant PTSD. And it turns out that a whole food plant-based diet, when compared to a standard, even it's the diet we compared it to is a pretty healthy diet. It just also included meat, eggs, dairy, and some processed foods. Turns out that about 7 weeks, you saw statistically significant increases in resilience and self-esteem. Now, that's not nothing.
Oh, no.
Resilience and self-esteem tend to be the biggest predictors of long-term behavior change. So if you were to look at, say, the behavior of substance use, right,
Hmm.
which is what we were looking at, if you were to take someone and follow them out of the rehab hospital setting and out of the sober living setting, so after about 10 weeks of their first introduction to treatment, and you were to follow them from that day to 1 year, the biggest predictors to whether they make it to 1 year, still employing healthy choices and not going back to substance use, would be resilience and self-esteem.
Hmm.
Now, why do we think we saw a higher increase in resilience and self-esteem within the plant-based group? I think there's a few reasons why. One is when people check into treatment, their health and their health trajectory is not a very safe feeling or safe experience for them. Waking up into their bodies that day doesn't feel like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. And the prognosis of their future doesn't feel like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. They have no interest in being in their bodies 5 years from now. It's actually a far more difficult place than it is today. And when you put them onto a plant-based environment, when you have them live that lifestyle for about 7 weeks, they get a very clear signal that their health is much different than it was day one. And they also
Mm.
get a sense that, oh my gosh, what's it going to be like in 3 months? If this is what 7 weeks did, what's three months going to look like? All of a sudden, there's a level of excitement to get to a future point in their life, right?
Hmm.
So resilience isn't just mental toughness in the face of adversity. It's a sense that there's a place beyond today that you want to be a part of, a place beyond today that feels so safe, secure, and hopeful that when there's a moment that's difficult, you're not only able to fight, you're willing to do the healing thing so that you can see the reality of that future place come to life and be present for it. That's one reason that we think we see it. We saw this ability to notice a future that for the first time in a long time was going to offer them something they thought they'd never have again. Okay,
Hmm.
that's really hopeful. The other thing that we notice is the downregulation of intense dopamine stimulus. So you'll notice that whole plant foods aren't very calorie dense, certainly not calorie dense compared to hyperpalatable processed foods.
Hmm.
Problem with hyperpalatable processed foods is that they elicit a dopamine response that goes outside of the range of what is appropriate to your psychology, just like with what drugs and alcohol do. Turns out you have a range of experiencing pleasure that's appropriate to your psychology,
Hmm.
meaning that it's just pleasurable enough that you'll want it when you need it and you'll enjoy it when you need it, but not so pleasurable that you would risk your well-being to get more of it. Okay.
Hmm.
And so the problem is in the modern environment, we have all of these what we call supernormal stimuli, these decisions that give us a dopamine response that goes way outside the bounds of what's appropriate for our psychology. Junk food, drugs, social media, video
Hmm.
games, right? And as you get exposed to these intense stimuli, your dopamine receptors defend themselves against this intense stimulus. They want that pleasure to occur within what they consider an appropriate range. So they dull their sensitivity so that now the pleasure getting from these foods and from these choices, social media, video games, junk food, it now falls within the appropriate range, but it's done so because you have dulled the sensitivity of your dopamine receptors. And by doing so, you have done something really, really harmful to your well-being. So there's a phenomenal book called Dopamine Nation by a researcher named Anna Lemke, and she describes it as a seesaw between pleasure and discomfort, right? And that when your dopamine resilience reward system or your reward system is resilient, we're right about here, right? So it's pretty level, meaning that
Hmm.
we like to get a little bit of pleasure, and then when that pleasure goes away, we feel a little bit discomfort, and then we'll go seek out things that give us just enough pleasure to get back to here, and this is great. But as you start to introduce the modern environment, you get this extreme amount of pleasure. And as that pleasure goes away, you get extreme amounts of discomfort. And
Hmm.
normal choices won't solve this problem. You have to go back to those supernormal stimuli to get that pleasure back. And this is a very uncomfortable place to live. And the only solution to that is dopamine deprivation. You have to create an environment that gives you the things that are representative of your natural history and your natural behaviors. So the caloric environment, the social environment, the technological environment, all of these things should look far more like an environment that we have evolved to live in than the modern environment. So food is part of it. So we
Hmm.
saw an impact of a caloric environment that looked representative of our natural history, and we saw increased resilience and self-esteem. If you were to remove social media, you'd notice that all of a sudden boring things to you feel a little bit more interesting. All of a sudden, a game of Scrabble might be very interesting to you after a month of no social media, and it
Hmm.
should be.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, not watching TV for 6 hours as you're just trying to find something to watch on Netflix isn't a problem. Whatever's on, you'll look for something on like normal cable TV. And if you find something interesting, you'll watch it. If there's nothing there, you won't. You won't seek dopamine for the sake of seeking dopamine. And so that's another factor that I think we saw within the plant-based group.
Wow, that's fascinating. And do you think when people go plant-based, like whole food plant-based, do you ever see some cases where they go low fat plant-based and maybe sometimes it just doesn't work to fix the problem?
So in regards to the diabetes
Yeah,
situation,
yeah, with
yeah,
that.
so there's a situation that can occur, and I'm glad you asked this question. And this brings us back to the C-peptide test.
Hmm.
So when you are insulin resistant, if you become insulin resistant, your body, like I mentioned before, your body, its entire purpose is to protect you. That's why it exists. Everything that it does is an organization around keeping you alive, protecting you from harm. So sometimes when an individual becomes insulin resistant and their blood glucose is elevated and it stays consistently elevated, the beta cells of the pancreas try to outcompete that problem. And they hyper secrete insulin, meaning they produce more insulin than what is appropriate for their biology and their physiology. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to basically, oh, if the physiologically normal amount of insulin will solve the problem, let's just produce more, thinking that this is a short-term problem and we can drive that glucose down. But the problem is that this person stays in that environment, eating those foods, making those choices. And so this hypersecretion of insulin occurs over and over and over again. And the beta cells cannot sustain that. And after a period of time, they can get burned out. You can actually
Hmm.
lose beta cell function. Now, this is not the same thing as being type 1. You're not an autoimmune diabetic, but
Hmm.
you are experiencing the same problem, which is the loss of beta cell function, a loss of insulin production inside of your body. And so
Oh.
if a person is following this lifestyle and they are doing it 100%, and they've shown some improvement, but they've hit this plateau and like my blood glucose is still elevated, I don't know what's going on. This is where getting that C-peptide test is so important. I
Mm.
know, is my insulin production below normal? Is it within the healthy range? Is it high? Right? Or is it not at all? Because that really gives us information on which direction to go. Now, if you notice that, hey, looks like my beta cell function is slightly low, and the range for your C-peptide test is zero point 0.8 to 3.2. So that's the range. We want it to be around two. That's about healthy, right? If you're noticing you're in the high ones, not a problem. If you're in the low ones or below one, absolutely, you want to go and get a autoimmune diabetic panel done to test for diabetic antibodies to see if that's why it's gone down that low. If it's below 8, you are not producing insulin. Period. End of story. And it doesn't matter whether you have antibodies or not. If it's
Hmm.
below 8, you need to talk to your endocrinologist immediately. Okay. But if it's below, if it's in the low ones and you get the C-peptide test or you get the antibodies panel test and it comes back negative, you're not positive for any antibodies. If you adopt this lifestyle and you live it rigorously, there is evidence that shows some people can regain beta cell function.
Wow, I believe it. Wow.
By encouraging the beta cells to not need to function so hard, that the insulin that you produce is far more effective at metabolizing carbohydrate energy than it ever has before. And
Mm-hmm.
those beta cells get a little bit of a rest and they can regain their function a little bit. So there is still hope for you, even if you're in that situation. And if you are a person who has, unfortunately, they've damaged their beta cells, it's at like a 0.9, it's at a 1, and you need to have a small amount of what we call basal insulin, which is that long-acting insulin. You inject it once per day at night. There's nothing wrong with you. That's not medicine. That is adding into your body what it would have produced if it was still capable. And if you are insulin sensitive and doing that, there is no reason to believe that you are at risk of any health issues down the line. You
Mm.
are as healthy as you could be. You're just giving your body the thing that it can't produce for itself.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. And lastly, any advice for long-term good blood sugar, whether we have health problems with it or not? What are
Yeah.
the tips and tricks we can take over the long term so we can live our whole life with
Yeah.
good blood sugar and like free from the risks of all these problems that can happen from, problematic blood sugar?
It's a great question. Number one is first trust that your body knows what it's doing. Okay. Your body is designed to be healthy. Your body is designed by nature to know how to metabolize carbohydrate energy. That is what it is designed by nature to do. And so trust that carbohydrates are healthy for you, right? Believe it. Whole intact carbohydrates are healthy. So what does a healthy dietary pattern look like? Because that's key number one. We want to stop believing that there's a singular best diet for humans. Okay. When we look at the data for human health outcomes, meaning what happens when we feed people a specific way, what happens to them over the course of time? Do they live healthy or do they get sick? When we look at all of the data, there's no one singular best diet. However, there are four very clear themes that we see, right? Those themes are number one, high in fiber, right? So
Hmm.
number one, make sure you're eating a fiber, make sure you're eating a fiber-rich
Yeah.
diet.
Yeah.
Number two, low in saturated fat, right? So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our saturated fat content is less than 8% of our daily calories per day. And that's so because you can't be devoid of saturated. There's some amount of saturated fat in nuts and seeds and stuff like
Yeah.
that,
I
right?
see that when I look at the labels because now I've been looking at that. Yeah.
So less than 8%. Okay.
Hmm.
Number three is we want to prioritize plants as protein. Unfortunately, we
Hmm.
talked about this before, 70% of the protein that people eat in Western cultures comes from animal products, and only 30% of their consumed protein comes from plants. We need to at least flip that number. And if
Hmm.
we can't get it higher, because guess what? When you do that, you start solving theme one and theme two, which is high in fiber, low in saturated fat. And the last theme is the removal of ultra processed foods. However, your personal preferences for eating are, as long as they meet those themes and you're eating in a calorie balance that's appropriate for your health, right? Meaning you've achieved a healthy body weight for your preferred lifestyle. That's the dietary pattern for you. We
Hmm.
want to move regularly. We want to move in a way that just allows us to be in movement more, right? We want to be experiencing joyous, purposeful movement. We want it to be celebratory, right? Find a way for it to be something that you do socially, whether that's pickleball or whether that's, going for walks with your friends on the lake or around town or whatever
Hmm.
it is you do, or going to a jazzercise class or a yoga class. Like make it something that you're a part of a community of shared respect that you want to show up and be present for every single day. Then we want to make sure that we drink water and we get outside into nature. If
Hmm.
you're doing those things, you can feel very confident that you are caring for your longevity, right? Those are the kind of foundations that set us up really well. Now, once you've achieved those things, I guess the last one would be sleep. As long as you've achieved those things, then you can start adding all the little nifty tricks like the cold plunges and the saunas and the
Hmm.
infrared and all that. But unless you're doing those first things I mentioned, you can spend thousands of dollars trying to purchase your health back and it won't work.
Yeah, well said. And I think alcohol is one thing that's bad for blood sugar problems, right?
Alcohol is a known toxin to every organ in your body. Okay. Alcohol is bad for blood sugar for many reasons. One, it's damaging to your liver. Okay. So this is going to be affecting your hepatic liver health, right? So your liver health is hepatic function, and hepatic function is important. It's vital for proper glucose metabolism. On top of that, when you're inebriated, you might make poor food decisions.
Might
So
more than likely you
yeah,
are too.
most
You're
people are
doing
not, most people drink socially.
Yeah,
And when
most
you
people aren't
drink
drinking
socially,
and then they're gonna make a nice salad. They're gonna be
right,
like, let me order the
exactly.
burger and fries. Oh, let's get ice cream
Exactly.
too, right?
Absolutely.
True.
So alcohol, there was an amazing study that recently came out. It's kind of a systematic review of all of the data on alcohol consumption and health risk. And it came out of Canada. And what they determined is that the
Mm.
safest amount of consumption of alcohol per week for an individual is zero.
I agree with that. Enough of these things saying, oh, a glass of wine a day, moderation adds some benefits. I don't buy into that.
There's actually no evidence that people are healthy because they drink wine. The benefits to wine that they talk about is what we call mechanistic speculation. There's things in wine like polyphenols, right,
Hmm.
that are valuable. And so because of the presence of this singular nutrient that in studies shows benefits to health, they're looking at that mechanism and then saying, well, then one glass of wine is fine because why not? It's polyphenols. And there are cultures that drink wine that live well, right? So like blue zones, right? There are lots
Yeah.
of blue zones in Icaria, Greece and Sardinia, Italy,
Hmm.
and that drink wine regularly. I am very confident that these populations are healthy in spite of the wine, not because of it. They're doing so much
Yes.
else really well. They're doing so many other things really well. And the other thing is how they drink. These cultures do not, do the end of the day, I'm stressed when I have a glass of wine.
Mm.
A lot of these cultures gather around the table, they'll share a half a glass of wine, maybe a glass of wine, and then they're in social settings where they talk about their lives with each other. So they're getting the social benefit of longevity, but it's not because of the wine.
Yeah, I agree with you, Adam. I really do. And one other thing I was thinking for those of us and those watching who want to, really take the low fat serious, right? Because I think being high fat has a lot of risks. Any ideas for a low fat salad dressing?
Yes, there's great salad dressings that you can find. You know, one of the best sources of low fat lifestyle that I know of is Chef AJ.
Mm,
Chef
yeah.
AJ has some great low fat salad dressings. There's also some really great flavored balsamic vinegars
Hmm.
that are really good. There's a company called California Balsamic that makes everything from like spicy, pear balsamic vinegar to, walnut infused, like walnut essence, like infused stuff. It's really remarkable what you can do. And you can even make some really kind of heavier salad dressings using potatoes and carrots because
Oh,
blended baked potatoes and carrots become like a cream. And then you can add flavors to it. You can add like zucchini or whatever, and it becomes this kind of thicker, creamy sauce that looks like a ranch dressing and it
that's
has
a
the mouth feel of it, but it
that's a good
isn't.
idea.
Yeah,
I would never think to do the potatoes and the so balsamic's okay, right? But maybe just don't douse it in a ton of olive oil with it.
absolutely. Yeah. And remember, even the cashew sauces, like, so I'm a big fan. There's a friend of mine who started a company called Credo Foods. They
Hmm.
make a cashew queso cheese sauce and it's oil free, it's sugar free, it's all organic, it's amazing. A serving is 2 tablespoons and it's 2 grams of fat, right? So that's
Hmm.
that's in the context of my total meal because it's a condiment, right? I'm going to add maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons as the topping. That did not make my meal high fat, right?
True. Hmm.
Because I'm not eating a bowl of cashews, right? I'm eating a condiment that's made with them. So in the context of the whole meal, when it comes to condiments, high fat condiments, I'm not super concerned. If someone is saying I'm having a trouble getting my dietary fat low, I want to know where the high fat foods are. Like how many avocados a day are you eating, right? How
Hmm.
many of nuts and seeds are you eating per day, right? How many, are you cooking with olive oil? Are you using olive oil at all? That's where I would look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been amazing. So much value. Thanks, Adam. And I
My
just love your
pleasure.
passion for this topic and your knowledge. And I agree with everything you said. And I think you've just given us so much. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Yeah, I love talking about this. I've been fortunate enough to, help launch the coaching program for Mastering Diabetes, where I was able to help, over 1,000 people as a coach reverse insulin resistance permanently. I've been able to write research papers on insulin resistance and been published in the medical literature. And so this is something I'm just super passionate about. And again, if you're a person who's concerned about your blood glucose health, if you have been convinced that it's a confusing problem and that there's a lot of technical secrets that you need to know, that if only you knew this or only you knew that or only if you bought this, please remember it is incredibly simple. The solution to insulin sensitivity lies in your environment. Your environment needs to look like the environment of an insulin sensitive person. And that means it's more than likely going to be whole food plant based. It's going to find water to drink. You're going to find the opportunity to move, and you're going to find the opportunity to be in the natural world and around people that you love.
Hmm.
That's the solution to this thing. And give your body time. If it takes you a year to reverse insulin resistance took decades to develop for you. 1 year is a blip of time in regards to how quickly your body was able to reverse your insulin resistance.
True. I love that. And you gave me an idea. I know you said you've coached a lot of people. I have an idea for our next episode. We should bring a couple of those people on.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's
absolutely.
do that. That would be so fun. And we can talk about
Yeah,
their transformations and how they're living and stuff.
yeah. I can.
Yeah.
One of them was my twin brother, so
No
we could.
way.
Yeah, yeah. So he was
Wow.
in 2016. He was 290 pounds. He had diabetes. He had high cholesterol. I asked him to move into my place with me in LA. He was living in Austin at the time, and he agreed. I said, "We're going to solve this. We're
Yeah.
going to live my lifestyle for the next 3 months, and I guarantee you, you will not be diabetic." And so we came and we met with Dr. Matt Letterman. Actually, he's one of the doctors from Forks Over Knives. On a day one, Letterman, he looked at me and he looked at Bobby and he goes, "Bobby, tell me exactly what you're going to be eating." And Bobby looked at Dr. Letterman and said, "Well, I'm going to eat exactly what my brother eats."
Hmm.
And so Matt took my brother's medication, goes, "In that case, you don't need these at all anymore." On day one, he took away my brother's diabetes medication. And in 6 weeks, his diabetes was gone.
Oh my God.
Six
Okay, we're
weeks,
bringing him on.
6 weeks unmedicated, his blood glucose levels were in the healthy range.
Wow. Okay, we have to bring him on if he's down for that. We have to.
Would love
That's
to.
okay. Awesome. Okay, you guys subscribe for that. That's gonna be such a good one, and we got to have you on regularly. I love it. This topic is very much needed because in this day and age, this is just such a common problem. People having all
Yeah,
these blood sugar problems. So we got to get all this knowledge, all this inspiration out there. So
I would.
thanks again.
My
And
pleasure.
I'll put all your links down below. You're amazing, Adam. And to the viewers, I hope this added a lot of value. Be sure to subscribe. We've got lots of great videos on this and so many other things that make you live your best life coming up. And I'll put another good video. The other one I did with Adam, I'll put that on the screen right now. That one's really good. And then one other really good one. And you guys can go watch those. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.